Welcome to Education Table Talk. This is Michael J., your host for this month, April's Education Table Talk. I'm talking about science education, the next generation, our attempt at a clever takeoff on the next generation science standards. And I have with me three wonderful guests. You'll get to know them here in just a little bit. But really just a great gang and a good point for discussion. We have our Haydn playing in the background, playing Hide and Go Seek. And I think it's nice to see spring here finally. Really want to thank everybody who listened to last month's show. We got really, really nice feedback and involvement. And as I mentioned, Ed Table Talk is now available on iTunes. You can subscribe to it there. And, of course, listen to it as you are through the Blog Talk Radio. We also want to thank our host, our sponsor, and that's MCH Strategic Data. We'll talk a little bit about some of their new offerings, actually, here a little bit further in the show. Some pretty exciting stuff happening over at MCH. Also, if you're interested in tweeting us about the show, you can do that by going to hashtag ETT. Go ahead and tweet there, or at Ed Table Talk. Ed Table Talk is where you can get a hold of us. So this topic is just really near and dear to my heart. For those of you who know me, you already know this, but for those of you who don't, you're never an ex-science educator. You're always a science educator. And I have to say, I was ordering a soda the other day, and I was talking about carbonic acid and carbonation and just nerding out as us science teachers want to do. But I still believe people are interested. Science education is pervasive and really necessary. And I myself have worked on standards. I actually worked on the California Science Framework of 1990, which is really beginning to age me. I'm beginning to feel ancient when I think how far back that is, although it seems just like yesterday. And, that experience, and I'm sure our guests on today's call who have been intimately involved with the development of the next-gen science standards and dissemination and implementation of that, they can certainly relate to this story, and that is the process is as much political as it is anything else. We hope that we can always cut through all of that politics and nuance to really get at what it really means to practice science education. And one of my favorite stories is the science framework, the California Science Framework of 1990 was what was commonly referred to as the Big Ideas Framework. We had structured around 6 big ideas, things like scale and structure and evolution and other topics that are really large guiding kinds of concepts. And I had taught science in California and got a call late at night, 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, from a colleague who called me and said, a bunch of us were sitting around and we were talking about the standards, and we think that there might be another big idea. And I first of all, I enjoyed that sort of process of discovery and that level of engagement by an educational professional in terms of thinking about how the nature of their discipline is structured, and the fact that there's that kind of conversation happening. And it's not so much about just the content of the standard itself, and I think that's true for the next-gen science standards, for all of the richness and greatness that's there. I certainly hope that my colleagues, my science educator colleagues, engage with that framework as an active living document. And I really think you're going to hear a lot of that embodied in the conversation that we have in today's show. So what I'd like to do is introduce our guests. We've got 3 wonderful guests with us today, and I want to start with Pat Shane. I've known Pat for a long time, Pat. I'm not supposed to say this as we all get older, but I know Pat through Encella and other organizations. So, Pat, maybe tell us a little bit about yourself.
At least you didn't say I'm your old friend. Thanks, Michael.
I stay away from that.
I hail from North Carolina. I've been here my kids were born here, and so it's been over 40 years now. And I was a classroom teacher for many years and then went to the central office and finally ended up at the University of North Carolina doing primarily professional development. I retired not long ago, and I'm doing some Educational Consulting, and I'm the Executive Director of the North Carolina Science Leadership Association.
And everybody knows Pat. And Pat right now, by the way, you'll hear it in her voice a little bit, is suffering from pollen inhalation, as I know many are in North Carolina, Georgia, other areas of the South. So thanks for still being on the show with us today. Thank you, Pat. Let me go
My
ahead
pleasure.
and next. Yeah, thanks. Next, let me go ahead and introduce Peter McLaren. Now, Peter, I have not known for long. Actually, just got to know him because of the show, but came highly recommended by a good friend of mine who also worked on the Next Gen Science Standards. So, Peter, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, and I resonated when you said about there's no such thing as an ex-teacher. I'm Science and Technology Specialist at the Rhode Island Department of Education, and when I go out and talk with my colleagues, I say I'm a teacher trapped in a bureaucrat's body now. But
Right.
I was in the classroom for 13 years before I came here to the Department of Ed in 2005. But what I really enjoy is when I have a chance to get around educators, and more importantly, when I get around students. It's just really great to be able to renew that. And my latest venture is being part of an NGSS writing team. I'm also part of the National Academy's developing assessments for the NGSS report that just came out in December, and I'm going to be part of the National Academies of Engineering committee that is going to be working on K-12 tools for engineering that will help the NGSS. So it's a great life, but it's more important that we have a chance to give back to education and help teachers and, more importantly, help students.
Yep. Perfect. Thank you so much for that, Peter. And last but certainly not least, Ted Willard, who I've probably known for now probably 2 or 3 years, and yet he and I have some common roots around structuring knowledge and some of those pieces. And so Ted and I, had we been in the same classroom together, would have been separated by the teacher. There's no doubt. So with that introduction, Ted, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm wondering if I'm last but not least, where does that leave Peter and Pat to fight it out? But my storied past involves 5 years editing science textbooks, 5 years as a high school physics teacher. I worked at AAAS Project 2061 for 12 years, doing work around the benchmarks for science literacy and the Atlas of Science Literacy. And for the last 2 years, I've been at the National Science Teachers Association, NSTA. I'm director of NGSS at NSTA.
Wonderful. And I know you, as all the others, will have a lot to say about where we're going with the science education in the U.S. But before we do that, let's go to one of our favorite segments on the show. And we do that early on because we're going to let our guests really think about this, as well as our listeners think about these rumors. And this is You Can't Handle the Truth. So you're going to hear, for those of you who haven't listened to the show before, is that you're going to hear 3 different rumors, one of which is actually a truth. And as is true with many different educational stories, some cases you hope it isn't actually true. And it's always interesting to hear the variations of what takes place. For those of you who are listening live to the show, feel free to tweet your thoughts about this to at Ed Table Talk, which one you happen to think is the truth. So let's go ahead and start with you, Pat. We're going to start with periodic table representations. Go ahead and read that for us.
Okay, well, as you know, chemistry is way too abstract for students to develop real understanding of what's taking place, or so says Steve Scheingold, a charismatic science teacher at the high school in the outskirts of Pittsburgh. He adds, I found out early on in my teaching that students can memorize reactions, do the calculations, and still not have a working knowledge of chemistry. Mr. Scheingold took a novel approach by focusing on patterns in the periodic table. It turns out that the standard periodic table we all learn is but one of many different ways of organizing the elements. We still have to be able to do all the math and be able to balance equations, but I can kind of predict what will happen, states Stephanie, a sophomore in one of Mr. Scheingold's chem classes. Another student comments, I'm only in this class because I need another lab class for college, but one of my favorite parts is the art. Mr. Scheingold's class looks like a cross between a lab class and an art class. He shares, students get to cut, paste, and rearrange the elements, creating their own representations based on elemental attributes, and try out others, including spirals, ovals, and leaf representations developed by others. This approach seems to excite students who might not otherwise get engaged with chemistry. They may never become chemists, but they certainly will make better decisions in their life because of the understanding they developed in my class.
Well, that was great. Thanks for reading that, Pat. And that is the periodic table representations. That's our first rumor. Let's go to our second rumor, and this is going to be read by Ted. And the name of this rumor is It's Stempting.
So, the demand for more STEM graduates leaves our economy short, nearly 1 million people with these skills. A President's Council showed that even a modest gain in such graduates could alleviate this shortfall, and the Howard Hughes Medical Institute has just the answer, CFIGs, or the Science Education Alliance Phage Hunters Advancing Genomics and Evolutionary Science, a course of study that includes real research, professional networking, and the opportunity to publish in a scientific journal started in 2008 with only 12 schools and has expanded to 73 institutions. Dr. Hatfield of the University of Pittsburgh, an author on the study who leads the program, states that, quote, phages are people-friendly viruses, and their population size and diversity provide an inexhaustible wealth of biological novelty that imposes no obvious limits on the number of students who can participate in CFIGs. Student phage hunter Allison says, quote, 7 weeks in, and I still have no idea what I'm doing, but there's a key difference now. 7 weeks ago, I was beyond frustrated with my lack of knowledge. Now I have come to realize that this is what science truly is. Guess and check, take a leap of faith, and hope you get lucky, making mistakes and learning to correct them, unquote. The writer wonders if the students actually learn something, or like so many students at that age, are just going through a phage.
Thank you, Ted. That was great. And that's called It's Stempting. Again, a little takeoff there on STEM education. So thanks for reading that, Ted. And last, we have our third rumor, and that is psych course and behavior modification. And Peter, turn this over to you.
Thank you. So in the senior year, a group of precocious students signed up for an AP psychology course that was new to the school offerings. Early in the class, they became intrigued by the works of Skinner and Thorndike and took a real interest in operant conditioning. While they're certainly familiar with the sort of awards they received at school and at home, the subtleties of the process were new to them. State the goal, monitor behavior, reinforce desired behavior, and reduce incentives to perform undesirable behavior. As a senior project, they set their sights high and decided to perform their own extracurricular experiment. Their goal was to train school administrators to allow students access to the soda machine in the teacher's lounge and the use of the school copy machine. Colin, one of the psych students, shared, we first determined who our target was and what the reward system would look like. They started with a particular counselor and the assistant principal and found that asking for access to the copier and soda machine, combined with subtle stimuli in the form of cleaning up a few items after lunch and helping select students with their academic issues, motivated the two administrators to give them access to the soda machine and the copier. Eventually, the students shared their experiment with the psych teacher, who shared with us his response. There is a fine line between conditioning and manipulation, and they need to be careful how they use that. He also said, both administrators shared with me that they recognized what my students were doing. And this is the new face of senior rebellion. Bring it on.
That's great. Thank you so much for reading that, Peter. So we're going to discuss these three rumors at the end of the show, and you, the listeners, can go ahead and let us know which of the three rumors you think is true. In fact, one of them is true, and you can actually tweet us at EdTableTalk or hashtag T and let us know which of the three rumors you think is actually true. So now we're going to jump into the actual core of today's program, and that is really looking at the next-gen science standards. It's as we said up front, this is has been a really big initiative. And what I'd like to do is actually start, Peter, with you and tell us a little bit about how this came about and the roles that you saw in this, and then we'll turn to Ted and Pat to give us color commentary.
Well, next generation science standards, Michael. When I look at the motivation behind it, when we look at the documents that when I was teaching, whether it's AAAS benchmarks or National Science Education Standards, those were great documents. They were powerful motivators. They influenced curricula. They influenced state standards. But those documents, the youngest of them, was now 18 years old, 1996, when National Science Education Standards came out. In the meantime, what happened since that time is the amount of research that came out that talked about how students learn, how the environments could induce different learning. I can tell you that when I was education is a second career, so I actually went to graduate school when I was 35 years old, and my pre-service professor would talk about the tabula rasa and how you just open up the kid's head and pour the knowledge in. That research has been completely changed in terms of that students bring a strong understanding of science. So the next generation science standards took what was learned from the national standards of AAAS benchmarks and National Science Education Standards, and with that combined the research that was compiled over that time, and therefore came together in the form of the framework for K-12 science education, which is the guiding document, the next generation science standards. So I'm really excited about these because it's not just about content. It's about students emulating what scientists and engineers do every day and connecting across the different domains of science and engineering through the cross-cutting concepts that are common across those domains. So it's a really exciting time. And again, going back to the earlier comment, you're never an ex-teacher. I mean, I just so wish I was in the classroom with these standards because of what the power that they can really bring forward in a classroom.
Great. And that's absolutely wonderful to hear that perspective. I know that's shared by nearly all, if not all, of the other authors on the document. Pat and Ted, any thoughts to share?
I think one of the things that I really like about the next-gen standards is the effort to remove the silos, looking at things as not connected, but just as individual entities, because all of science really is connected, and those cross-cutting ideas really help students as well as their teachers to understand that. And these connections, I think, really help with greater understanding of the concepts and how they're applied to real life.
So I would throw in two pieces about this. One sort of to tie on to what Pat was talking about knocking down some silos. There's been this tension for years, maybe for decades, about, is science a process of doing things or is it a body of knowledge? And the answer I would say is yes. Debating whether it's the content or the process that is more important is like trying, or the practices in NGSS or the core ideas are more important, is like debating which is more important to the area of a rectangle, length or width. And, it does in pieces. The other element that I think is really important here is the process, a nationwide process that went on, and a tremendous amount of people who are involved in this. Newton's laws are the same in Florida as they are in California, as they are in Massachusetts or Rhode Island, they are in Kansas or Kentucky. All these places are different pieces. And 26 states got together. Each state had a committee of educators and other experts working together, the 41 writers from across the country, all like Peter, going through rounds of revision, and a huge amount of time of the entire education community went into providing feedback and working towards the standards that were finally released about a year ago, and now have been taken, and we're at the stage already, after just 1 year, where 1 in 4 students in the United States now lives in a state that has formally adopted NGSS, with a lot more going on in terms of the process.
Let me. I want to follow up on that, Michael.
Go ahead, Peter.
If I could, Ted brought up a great point, and a couple of things I want to reinforce. There were 41 writers that are involved with the NGSS. I was one of 41, but the vast majority, and this is really important for people to understand, the vast majority of those writers were classroom educators. I was going to say there were 26 of those 41 that were classroom educators. Why that's important is these people are active in the classroom. They flew in on a Thursday. We got busy writing Friday, Saturday, Sunday, flew home on a Sunday. But more importantly, when we were writing standards, the teachers would say, this is a great standard, but you know what? It's not going to happen in a year in my classroom. It just needs to be. It really is something that needs to be refined. That was really, really powerful. That the teachers really talking about what was going to be able to happen. They believed in the process, and they really, really showed up as far as how that their experience really came into play with the standards. And the other thing I want to pick up on what Ted was saying, it was truly a state-led process, and more importantly, I'm hoping that the audience out there have had a chance to look at the public drafts that came out, because if they saw the public drafts and offered comments, those comments were read by every single writer. Every single comment was reacted to. So I know that when I'm asked to be part of a survey and I put in my time and energy in the survey, and then the next thing I know, it doesn't change one lick, that's really frustrating. What people that were involved in the public displays, public surveys, found that is when they saw the next version, they saw changes. And they saw changes reacting directly to that comment. That is incredibly important, because it was the stakeholders' voice that was part of that. So when we say state-led, it wasn't state agency-led, it was state-led. In other words, all the stakeholders in those states had voices. That was important.
I have to totally agree with that, because there's real ownership of the final product, and the evolution from where it was to how the final version looks, I think is really important, because the people were heard, the teachers were heard.
Well, this is something we brought up when we were discussing the topic earlier, but, Jerry Wheeler, ex-executive director of NSTA, mentioned to me in an email that, he certainly is seeing the pushback on the Common Core standards, state standards, having a secondary effect on the next-gen science standards. What do you think about that? I mean, is there just a general pushback on higher-level standards that are more pervasive around the country?
I think a first point in all of this is that there's a lot of confusion at different points about the relationship to the next generation science standards and the Common Core state standards. A lot of people, when they looked at the Common Core standards, particularly in the English language arts, there was a section in there that dealt with reading and writing in science and technical subjects. And some people misinterpreted that to mean that the Common Core was a process that those were all the standards you would need to do science as well, that they were science standards in and of themselves, when they were really meant to be about just that reading and writing those subject areas. And you still need standards that address the issue of understanding science, or being able to engage into with science practices and pieces like that. So that's a piece. And also that the process, the development of NGSS came several years after the development of Common Core, and that it was a process done by some different organizations and be involved in it. I mean, Peter mentioned that the work of the writer is one piece that I don't know if we've really emphasized yet, the aspect of how the writers had to guide them the framework for K-12 science education of something that was produced by the National Academy of Sciences. So you had, nationally respected, actually internationally respected scientists, some Nobel Prize winners involved as well, saying we've got the science right here. And you had some of the premier science education researchers involved as well, making ensuring that we were talking about the best what the research says are the ways to really get students to learn science. To build on that, and again, it's about understanding. There's a lot of misconception. What I hear is that they're equating the Common Core standards with a curriculum, and that is really not true. I mean, what we found is that if we really show what the expectation is, and that's what the standard is that you want to be able to have students be able to achieve this expectation. If you really look at that, I would argue that there's no one that's going to say, no, I want my child to do that. I want my child to be able to do that. But that's not the curriculum. You build the curriculum from those standards. And it is not a prescribed curriculum. It's a common set of standards. Now, why is that important? And I think it was brought up earlier, but what's great about that is you have 45 states that are actively involved with the Common Core, and what's important about that is that professional development, lessons, resources, opportunities to discuss ways in which that you can deliver instruction to students can be done using the same sets of standards. Whereas before, if you had different states had different standards, you had this variation. And in a similar manner, that's what's powerful about the next generation science standards. These standards are common in terms of that they're shared by the 12 states that have adopted, or 12 entities that have adopted them, 11 states plus the District of Columbia. But more importantly, I can have a conversation with Kansas, or I can have a conversation with California. And one of the things I like to talk about, if it plays in Topeka, it's going to play in Providence, because it's the same sets of standards, and that's powerful to be able to bring that forth. Not just at the state agency level, but teachers can talk with teachers and be able to talk about common outcomes. So if I want to be able to just really break a paradigm, Common Core is not a curriculum. They're expectations. They're powerfully strong expectations that are going to be good for kids.
And you would say the same is true for next-gen science standards?
It is, absolutely. I mean, again...
Yeah. He's a little biased about that second one.
I just wish there was a way in which that we can, if people just took a look back and just say, this is what you want students to be able to do, and then argue why you don't want them to be able to do that.
Yes.
I think the conversation would really would calm down a lot, because that's what the standards are designed to do. Get kids to a certain point. As I said before, when I was my first job was in private industry, that we had standards in that private industry where we wanted to have all the buildings within that company to be operated the same way. And that standard was, there was a level of expectation that we tried to adhere to. Well, you can't, kids aren't widgets, but you certainly don't want to lowball that expectation. You want to have kids reach the highest expectation possible. But this is an all kids agenda. Kids are going to reach those at different levels at different times.
So we're going to take a quick break right now. Go ahead, Pat.
I was just going to say, with our mobile society, having common standards across the states makes so much sense in addition, so that if I move from North Carolina to Indiana, that I can expect similar kinds of things and not to be totally lost in terms of what's going on. And this is, to me, a statement of what makes sense for our kids. And I see no way in the world that an individual state could possibly come up with a set of their own standards that could come close to the next gen in terms of the kind of expertise and time and energy and thought and feedback that's gone into them.
Perfect. So we're going to take a break quickly from the conversation. We're going to take a quick break from the conversation, and we'll come back actually to Pat, and we'll talk a little bit about what are the implications for publishers and what do we do differently. But in the meantime, I do want to just mention again our sponsor, MCH Strategic Data, and I do want to mention I had a really nice conversation with John and Jackie over there late last week, and they have a new service which is called the MCH Monitor Service, which is a service where they're actually compiling school data on an ongoing basis. Traditionally, we end up writing a lot of reports for people as well, but the data is often a year old. Well, with this new MCH Monitor service, the data is updated 12 times a year. It's updated monthly. That's not 12 times in 1 month. It's actually spread out over the year. So it's 12 times a year, reaching over 40,000 different school districts and an increasing number of teachers. And what's particularly exciting about this is that they're actually offering an opportunity for those who want to use that data to test that data out. So it's a try before you buy kind of approach, and I know I love that with data, and I think you'll really be happy with sort of the kinds of data they're providing and the ability to ask some really powerful questions about that. Larry Buckweitz is the contact over there. That's Larry Buckweitz. And you can reach him at larryb@mchdata.com. Again, larryb@mchdata.com. And if you want his phone number, just let us know, and we'll send that to you. So, again, get in touch with MCH. One of the ways that we also thank our guests for participating is we don't pay them. We thank them with our words, of course, and our behavior. But in addition, we give them $50 that they can donate to any number of different projects that exist out in an environment which is called Donors Choose. And if you're not familiar with Donors Choose, you should be. And each of our guests today chose a project that they wanted to support. So I just want to have them have a chance to tell us a little bit about the project they chose to support with their $50. And Peter, let me turn to you first and just tell us something about the project Special Olympics.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. And I really thank you for this opportunity because Donors Choose is a great organization, and Rhode Island Special Olympics is an organization I've been actively involved with since 1975. I work at when I say work, I volunteer at the state games, and I actually organize developmental swimming. But basically, Special Olympics, this is an opportunity to be able to provide mentally challenged students the opportunity to participate in sports. More importantly, in the public schools, it's really made an impact as far as showing how the diversity of students and how they can contribute and how that really impacts the school. It's a great organization, and thank you so much for letting me be able to sponsor that.
You bet. Thank you for that thoughtful selection. Let me turn now to Ted Willard. Ted, you had a contribution to a project in Montgomery County Public Schools.
Yes, because there is no line between my home life and my work life. With all the years my daughter was in school, I was active in the PTA within Montgomery County, Maryland. I was PTA president once for elementary school, once for middle school, chaired the PTA's curriculum committee at different points in time. And so I made a donation to buy some, I did go for science equipment at a school in Montgomery County.
Wonderful. Well, thanks again for that thoughtful contribution. And the last, Pat, you contributed to science materials needed to teach.
That's right. And Mrs. Tyler is at Guideway Elementary in Tabor City, North Carolina. And this is down east, as we say, which means that it's over toward the coast, and she is in an extremely high poverty area and thus has very limited funds to get equipment, yet she knows how excited her students get when they're actually able to have hands-on materials. And she wanted some materials to work on force and motion. And with the help of not only my donation through your help there, of course, but with 8 donors, she was able to get enough money to get classroom sets of these materials, and they're all excited, and I just think it's wonderful, and I'm pleased to help a school in North Carolina.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for that, Pat. And again, we really do support Donors Choose and the ability to support teachers as professionals in their goals. We'd love to see all that funding come through the schools, of course, but we also understand that teachers are innovators and trying some things on their own. So thanks to all 3 of you for that, for selecting those projects. So Pat, let's turn to you and talk a little bit about what do you expect to see different in instructional materials and maybe something around teacher support around implementing the next gen science standards?
Well, I think one of the issues with, I'm going to say before next gen, was the vast diversity among states in terms of what the standards are and what they need and at what grade levels and so on. So it was a real conundrum for any kind of materials producer, whether it's print materials or online materials or hands-on materials. It created real issues. And I think this will help the providers to focus on what they can be doing and to have materials available in many different forms at appropriate grade levels. And I see it only as something to help improve what's going on and in turn then helping with the student understanding.
What about, particularly in your area of where you've committed a lot of your time around teacher preparation, how do you see that being impacted by NGSS?
Well, clearly I think if you have a common focus, which in this case we're talking about next gen, then you can have a common dialogue and you can have a common way in which to approach what you're talking about, so that instead of talking about scientific method and all that, we can turn to the idea of practices, and we can be very specific if we're talking about science or engineering practices. And the engineering, I think, is extremely exciting because I see that as the real world. I see that as the making of the content that you might have learned through the design process and project-based work. Students really understand why they're learning this, what it means. It's not just a set of facts, but it has real meaning for them. So I think the combination of the practices along, of course, with the core ideas and so on is critically important and will make big differences in terms of understanding of science.
Great. Ted, you shared some data with us that I think was generated by NSTA having to do with teachers' views about the next-gen science standards, looking at 3 different aspects. Looking at ask them whether or not they think the NGSS will have a positive impact on the quality of science education. The second question was whether their school or district will provide professional development that they need to be successful. And the third is that there will be ample time in the school day for teachers to really help students develop knowledge and skills described in the NGSS. Well, we know 2 things. There's never enough time and never enough money. But I still found the findings from this particularly interesting. Do you want to talk a little bit to this study? And I know it was not a scientifically conducted. It was really just taking the temperature of the science education, educators. But tell us a little bit about what the findings were.
Yeah. So we basically, as you noted, we have a weekly newsletter to people, members, and others who can sign up for, and sent that out and asked them to respond to a short poll. And these were sort of 3 of the findings from that poll in sort of anticipation of the release of NGSS back last year. Universal, I would say, agreement in the that the standards would be a positive impact of these new standards. Over 40% strongly agreed, similar agreed, somewhat agreed. Less than 5% had any sort of disagreement about that. So 95+% were looking forward to the standards and thought they were good.
Yep.
The issue of there being attention to getting the type of professional development they need was more mixed. There was in general agreement about that, but it was by a pretty tight margin between the two sides, and whether agreed or disagreed with that. And then the big concern that they sort of had more of an expression about was having time in the day to work with their students about this, where there were more people who were probably concerned about it than who felt strongly about that would be the case.
Yep. So I want to, I'll share a quick story and then would love your reflection on it. I mean, I was at one time the president of California Association of Chemistry Teachers, the northern section, and this was many, many years ago. I started out my class, I actually said this in my opening talk for our annual conference, that, we started on chapter 32 on organic chemistry at the beginning of the year, and then made sense out of that the rest of the year. And it created quite a stir, there's a tendency to sort of say that we should cover the curriculum. And this issue of time often has to do with coverage and not necessarily developing understanding. How does that issue addressed within the NGSS, and what strategies do you see educators, schools using to really get past that issue?
Let me address that, Michael. And I love that approach, because it's just right on, because it's not, science is not sequential. It's not, there's things you need to build upon, but it's not an ordered process. You're building on skills, you're building on concepts. And TED's data, I think, is really important, because what we're finding going out in the field as a science specialist and talking with teachers is that there is a common question that's out there. What does it look like? What does this look like? And that would be the same question I'd be asking if I was a teacher. So what's really important, and I think Pat talked about it earlier, is that where teachers really resonate with these standards is the importance of having kids emulate the practices that scientists and engineers do. As I was mentioning before, when I was in pre-service, my pre-service education professor would tell me, you need more inquiry into that activity, McLaren. It was like as if I had a bottle of inquiry that I could open up and just pour it into the lesson. Now we have practices that are very defined that teachers can use when they plan to be able to have students be able to engage with these practices and apply them to the content. And, that really helps in terms of how that information is resonating. So when teachers are saying, the professional development is necessary, absolutely. But if we can give them examples, and that's actually some of the things we're doing over now, and it's providing some models so that teachers can see, they'll find that it's not like this particular standard needs X number of lessons and this standard needs another X number of lessons. So before you know it,
right,
it becomes a summative process. It's actually a bundling aspect. So if you're teaching the one standard, you're actually reinforcing another standard. And not to mention the fact that these standards are going to be utilizing the Common Core literacy and the Common Core mathematics to be able to bring that forward. So it's really more about working smarter rather than harder once the curriculum is brought forward and instruction starts to play in. The teachers, once they see, at least in my experience, once they have a chance to see what it looks like, there's a lot of head nodding, whereas before when I walk into that room, there's a lot of folded arms. But at the end, they're nodding their heads and they're seeing it. So that's really important.
So, Pat, I certainly have done a lot of professional development teachers. You see a lot of nodding of heads, but when it comes to actual practice, and you end up back in the classroom and you're under all the kind of traditional pressures. Given your experience with teacher professional development and support of that, what do you expect to take place?
Well, I think we're asking for a change in how we do business. And anyone who knows anything about the change process knows that it's difficult. And when teachers or anyone gets frustrated, they go back to what they know, even if they know it's not successful. So I think the professional development aspect of the next gen is going to be exceedingly important, to the point where they need to understand the structure and how to use it, and they need help working through it so that they're comfortable with it, so that they can make the change. And I think, according to the survey that Ted shared with us, if you have 85% of the teachers saying that this is going to make a big difference, then they're there and they're ready to make the change. But I think the assistance needs to be given, and I think that's going to be one of the biggest challenges, is how to help all teachers understand how to use the standards, and then helping them with those areas that they might not be so familiar with. And, of course, we hear engineering as one of those areas that teachers don't feel comfortable with. And I think if you get into engineering, you see that it really is something that they can do. So it's a matter of working with them and not expecting, okay, you have the new standards, now have at it, and I expect big changes in the next 2 months. Change takes time, and that time needs to be provided. And I think we'll see great success, and they're truly fantastic standards, and we need to give them a chance for that change process to happen.
Right.
One of the things that Pat brought up on that that I just want to reinforce is that the key point about including administrators in this process, because and Pat could probably talk about this. We do a professional development. You get teachers excited, they see it, they understand it, they're willing to do it, but when they go back to the classroom, unless the administrators understand the purpose and what it looks like, that's going to be a barrier rather than a support, because the administrators have to understand this also. A science classroom is not going to look the same as a foreign language classroom or a mathematics classroom. You may see that. I would hope a good mathematics classroom is going to be engaging a lot of different practices and be able to have problem solving, kids actively working along, and that's a change coming along. But we really have to get administrators to be able to be part of this awareness also. One of the most challenging jobs in education is being a building principal right now, and they're so important to be able to include in this process.
I think along with that is the pressures that are put on schools and school systems and administrators for the test results. And people expect teachers to be able to give their students pills and they'll instantly change, and the test results will be fantastic. And we tend to want things immediately. And so I would like to see all administrators, at least at the building level, but also at the central office level, take part in the professional development that their teachers take part in, at least for part of the time, so that they can have an understanding of what's being asked of the teachers, and more importantly, why the next gen is so good and so important, and why it's worth the effort to make those changes.
I think
so, Pat, I'll take the administrator and I'll raise you one, and that is, I would say that it also needs to be the community. It needs to be parents and others. That when what they expect to see taking place, there needs to be some understanding. And often we don't include those members of the community in that process.
I totally agree, and that's an excellent point, because I've heard so many people say, well, that's not how I learned science, and I don't know why I should have to have my kid do something new and different.
Yeah. So let me we have some time left here. I just want to make sure that get any last thoughts from you around this topic, and then we're going to go back to our you can't handle the truth. So any kind of summative thinking around next-gen science standards? Ted, let's go to you first.
Well, we've talked about a little bit of how this is a heavy lift in some cases, and it's going to be hard work for teachers at different points, hard work for school systems to play out with it. I'm always, when I think about that, reminded of the scene in A League of Their Own, where Tom Hanks is talking to Gina Davis, and Gina Davis is as a baseball player, is talking about how hard it is to play, and Tom Hanks goes and says, "The hard is what makes it worth doing." And the key point here is that there may be some work involved in making NGSS happen the way it should, and working through this, but it's for the betterment of students and for them being ready for the future that we will be facing.
Well put. Well put. Peter?
I guess what I'd like to leave, and especially for the audiences out there, is that when we go out and when I say to myself, my colleagues who are part of the writing team, or with my colleagues and the science specialists, what I always leave every presentation with is the fact that you never, ever, ever underestimate the power of a good teacher in terms of their creativity and innovativeness. That's where the power of these standards are coming in, because I'm looking at states that are sharing these standards. And as teachers become more involved in them, they understand them more, the way in which these standards are going to be made alive is going to be done not from the top down, but from the classroom up. And I really, really look forward to seeing how this innovativeness could come through. I have great faith in the educators in America to be able to take these and make a real difference in the way that students are being taught science.
And Pat? Thanks, Peter.
Well, I certainly have to concur with what both the gentlemen have said, and I would add to this that I think the next-gen science standards make science more meaningful to students, and students really want meaning from what they are doing, and why does this affect me, and that type of thing. And the way the silos are broken down and sense is made and the application to the real world, I think will make a huge difference. And not just for those students who are going to go on and work in science fields, but because of the importance of almost every decision we make can be related back to science in some ways, and our quality of life, and having the core background and understanding to make these important decisions. And I think the next gen has real promise to make that happen.
Perfect. Which reminds me, by the way, to everybody, Happy Earth Day. Talking about making it.
Oh, yeah, Happy Earth Day.
Yes.
So let me turn to the next segment, talking a little about conferences that are coming up. I'm going to go quickly through some, but I know there's some that our guests have to share. I've mentioned this on previous shows. We have the SIIA Education Industry Summit coming up, May 12th through 14th in San Francisco. There's a great program, and in fact, I have a session that I'm moderating there on making metadata useful. So I look forward to seeing many of you at that event. There's also the AAP Content and Context Conference coming up in Washington, D.C., June 2nd through the 4th. The second is a Going Global Day. The other 2 days are the core conference. I'm the conference chair for that conference, so I can just tell you personally, despite my involvement, it will be a brilliant conference. So please, I do encourage everybody to participate. It's really be a good meeting. Ted, you had mentioned there's an NSTA STEM Forum and Expo coming up May 14th through 17th. You want to tell us just briefly something about that?
Yeah, for those of you who are familiar with NSTA conferences, the STEM Forum and Expo is a very different flavor from most of our other conferences in terms of who is there and the format of the day. And so really, I went the first time this past year. We had one, as you said, it's in the Big Easy. Our keynote speaker will be Anissa Ramirez, who describes her as a science evangelist, and it's a former engineer, written some books, done some TED Talks, and the STEM forum is really nice in bringing both the math education community, the engineering education community, and the science education community all together.
Perfect. Good. So if you want more information about that, we'll make sure that's posted at the Ed Table Talk site. Let me go ahead and turn to you, Peter, again briefly, because we're going to run short on time here, but building capacity for state science educators.
Sure. That's a project of my organization that I was part of the executive board. It's Council of State Science Supervisors, and building capacity brings together state teams at the state level as well as the LEA level to come together and discuss issues around implementation and adoption. And also in June 25th to 27th in New Orleans, the CCSSO is going to have a national conference on student assessment that will bring in some good opportunities to discuss how to assess science in the future, and I think that's going to be very powerful.
Great. And again, these will be posted up on the Ed Table Talk site. And last, Pat, let's go to you for the NCELA Leadership Institute, certainly a group near and dear to my heart, having been involved with that historically. Tell us what's happening in Colorado Springs.
Well, the National Science Education Leadership Association has an institute every summer that's designed to be a little bit more in depth than their one-day professional development institutes. And this is going to be held June 24 to 27 in Colorado Springs, and it's focusing on leadership aspects of NGSS. And there'll be a couple of strands that will be focused on. One is instruction, and then the other is the role of the leader and leadership strategies for implementing the NGSS. And Roger Bybee, who is part of the writing team for the NGSS, will be there, and he also has an NSTA book out about the case for STEM education, and he'll be working with that. And then Kendall Zoller is going to talk about the choreographing of presenting and how to be a more effective professional development person and how to present in general more effectively. And Mikhail Lalane is with Laser Alliance in the state of Washington, and they're going to be talking about how to involve teams of teachers, administrators as well as teachers in the change process.
Great. Thank you for that, Pat. Let's go back to the You Can't Handle the Truth. We have a limited amount of time, but tell me, which of the three do you think is actually the truth? There's the psych course and behavior modification, there's periodic table, and there's it's STEMting. Which one do you think it is?
I think it's mine, because I would never lie.
Psych course. It's going to be the psych course.
Being someone who understands a lot about different types of learning styles, I think bringing the arts into the study of the periodic table and looking at it in different ways from tradition certainly has to be very successful.
So I hear one vote for each. No consensus with this group.
Someone's right.
So I'll tell you which one it is, and it's STEMting. That's actually a real project.
Wow.
The C Phages project. So you'll have to look that up. You'll see that online. We're going to ask our guests to give us a 10, 15-second input in just a bit about what they would tell an administrator about what to expect to see differently in schools implementing the NGSS. I do want to thank our host again, our sponsor, MCH Strategic Data, with their new MCH Monitor service. Do contact Larry Bookweitz at larryb@mchdata.com. And I think it's a very exciting service. Our next show is actually on May 20th at the usual time, and the topic for the next show is around privacy, anonymity, and instruction. Who do you need to know to learn around here? I do want to thank, again, our guests. We have Peter McLaren. Thank you, Peter. Ted Spillert. Thank you, Peter. And Ted, and thank you, Pat Shane, for participating in today's call. And I do want to thank our producer, and that's Sheila Evans, as well as our intern, Rakaya Wells. So quickly, tell us, what would you tell an administrator who's implementing NGSS?
I would tell them
classrooms.
a lot of activity.
Yep, a lot of
Anybody?
activity, and I say, make sure you go slow. It's going to take some time. It's not going to be overnight, but people are going to learn slowly. But take time and be patient.
Perfect.
Like getting to Carnegie Hall, practices.
Thank you all so much for being on today's call, and really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.